Hey there, knowledge enthusiasts, and a super warm welcome to English Listening Boost. It's fantastic to have you tuning in. I'm your host, ready for another exploration.
And I'm really looking forward to this one. Ready to jump in.
So today we're doing something pretty cool, a cross-cultural comparison, looking at the United States and Japan. I've been looking through this really detailed report, and it pulls out some fascinating differences.
Yeah, it's a great topic. We're aiming to sort of unpack the key insights, focusing on maybe four main areas: religion, work, community life, and family structures.
Exactly. And running through it all, it seems this core difference, American individualism versus Japanese collectivism, it comes up again and again.
It really does. So hopefully you'll find some surprising facts, maybe challenge some assumptions. It should give a clearer picture of these two, well, very distinct cultures.
Okay, let's dive right in then. First up, religion. What strikes me immediately about the U.S. is just how, diverse the religious scene is.
Well, absolutely. I mean, Christianity is still the largest group, something like 62, 63%. But even within that, it's incredibly varied. Evangelicals, Catholics, mainline Protestants, historically Black Protestant churches.
And the thing that really jumped out at me was the growth of the knowns people with no religious affiliation. It's huge now, almost a third of Americans.
Yeah, that's a massive shift. Then you've got smaller percentages, around 1 or 2% each, for Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu communities. It's a real mix.
That rise of the knowns is really significant, isn't it? It suggests maybe a move away from traditional structures for a lot of people. Could have big social impacts down the road.
For sure. And religion in America, it often feels more public than in Japan. You have this idea of civil religion, shared national symbols, holidays like Christmas or Easter being widely celebrated, even by people who aren't strictly religious.
Right, those shared rituals and symbols that sort of create a common identity, even if not tied to one specific church.
Exactly. It gives this layer of shared values, perhaps.
Which can lead to tension, though, can't it? Like those debates about religious symbols in public squares, the whole separation of church and state thing. I remember reading about Supreme Court cases on that.
Definitely. There's this constant legal balancing act, trying to respect religious freedom, but also maintain that separation. Sometimes symbols are okay if they're part of a bigger display or have historical context.
It's a uniquely American puzzle, it seems.
It is. And you probably wouldn't see quite the same kind of public or legal fight over religious symbols in Japan, generally speaking.
And all that diversity in the U.S., maybe it pushes people to think more deeply about their own faith. And you see interfaith groups working together on social issues like homelessness.
That's a good point. The report suggested this kind of pluralism might encourage people to actively choose or define their beliefs. Now, shifting focus to Japan, it's a very different picture, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. The report stressed that many Japanese people don't strongly identify with one specific religion. It's almost like asking, what's your religion, is kind of a foreign concept sometimes.
Right. It's more about cultural customs. Visiting a shrine for New Year, the Obon festival to honor ancestors. These are things people do, often as part of family or community tradition, not necessarily strict religious belief.
Like Christmas in Japan, I hear it's huge, but mostly as a commercial romantic thing. Totally different from the religious focus it has for many in the U.S.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. And while Shinto has deep roots in Japanese identity, maybe 25% feel a personal connection, it's not quite like in the U.S. where, a significant chunk of people believe America should be a Christian nation.
So the underlying motivations seem really different. You describe the U.S. scene almost like a religious market with denominations competing.
Yeah, in a way. Individuals often shop around to find a faith that fits their personal beliefs. That competitive aspect really reflects that American individualism we talked about.
Okay, I see that.
Whereas Japan is more characterized by syncretism. This blending of Shinto and Buddhist practices is very common. People participate in traditions as part of their cultural identity, often without feeling the need to exclusively pick one label.
So Americans searching, Japanese participating in tradition, makes sense.
And that spills over into politics too. In the U.S., you often see a link: higher religiosity tending towards conservative views, lower towards liberal. That link is much, much weaker in Japan.
That's a really key difference. And secularization looks different too. U.S. sees the rise of the knowns. Japan has long had low formal affiliation, but still maintains many spiritual and cultural practices.
Precisely. So fundamentally, religion just plays a different role in society. and individual lives in the two places.
Okay, fascinating. Let's switch gears to work, another area where the report highlighted some stark contrasts in work ethic and values.
Definitely. The American work ethic, it's got those deep historical roots, hard work, self-reliance, sometimes tied to religious beliefs like the Protestant work ethic idea.
And then the 20th century brought corporate structures, the 9-to-5.
Right, but now things feel like they're shifting again, don't they? Technology, globalization, the gig economy, remote work. It's changing the landscape.
It really does. It feels like people are looking for more than just a paycheck now.
Exactly. The report mentioned a growing value placed on things like autonomy, having a sense of purpose, flexibility, alongside the usual suspects like stability and money, especially for younger generations, millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah, that focus on meaningful work, mental health, work-life balance. I read something like 94% see balance as important, and for almost 3/4, it's central to choosing a job.
That's huge. And paid time off, PTO, is a really valued benefit in the U.S.
Definitely. You get more as you stay longer, usually.
Right. Typically increases with tenure, 10, 11 days after a year, maybe 15 after 5, 17 or 18 after 10, something like that, plus sick days, personal days, holidays.
But here's the kicker I read, that a lot of salaried workers don't even use all their PTO.
Isn't that something? It suggests that even though people want the time off, there's maybe this underlying pressure, this cultural thing about always being on or productive.
Speaks volumes. Okay, now, Japan. The report emphasized group harmony, right? And a really strong commitment to the company.
That's central. Loyalty to the employer is often very deep. The workplace can be seen as a kind of second family. And the structure is typically quite hierarchical, respect for seniority. The senpai-kohai, senior-junior relationship is important.
It's been communication, much more indirect. This idea of reading the air, very different from the American directness.
Oh, absolutely. And decision-making, too. They often use nimawashi.
Nimawashi. That's the groundwork thing, right? Talking to people behind the scenes before the official meeting.
Exactly. It's about building consensus informally first, like preparing the soil before planting. It can take time, but the aim is smoother sailing later. And traditionally, companies hire generalists, train them extensively, aiming for lifetime employment, though that's changing now, too.
And that after-work socializing, nomikai, sounds important for team bonding, but maybe sometimes feels a bit obligatory.
It can, yeah. It's seen as part of building relationships. So if you look at the core drivers, in the U.S., it's often about individual achievement, climbing the ladder. In Japan, it tends to be more about contributing to the group's success and maintaining harmony.
That makes sense. So the unwritten rules, the psychological contract with your employer, are different too. Loyalty and security in Japan versus maybe more of a focus on skills and moving between jobs in the U.S.
That's a good way to put it. It's often seen as more transactional in the U.S., focused on what skills you bring and develop. Another striking difference is risk tolerance. Japanese business culture is generally more risk-averse.
Right, careful planning. Whereas in the U.S., especially in tech, you hear fail fast, learn fast.
Exactly. Much higher tolerance for risk, even celebrating failure as a learning opportunity sometimes.
And back to that work-life balance paradox in the U.S. Valued in theory, but maybe the culture makes it hard to fully achieve in practice.
Seem that way sometimes. It really makes you think about how deep these cultural values run and how they shape our everyday working lives.
Definitely. Okay, let's move on to community. How do people connect with their neighbors? What did the report say about the U.S.?
Well, it seems most Americans know some of their neighbors, but knowing most or all of them isn't that common. Maybe only about 30%. It's highest in rural areas.
Makes sense. Lower density, maybe more reliance on each other.
Could be. And lower in cities, higher in suburbs than cities too. Among those who know some neighbors, about half interact weekly. Digital contact is less frequent, though.
And neighborhood block parties. Sounds like they're not actually that common.
Apparently not. Over half said they never have them. But interestingly, a majority, almost 60%, trust a neighbor enough to give them a house key. Higher trust in suburbs and rural areas than urban.
Interesting split. And the type of community matters, right? Rural might be planned interactions, shared schools, urban more about proximity, shared buildings or interests. Suburbs often family-focused around schools and parks.
Exactly. It shapes the nature of those connections.
Now, what about broader community and volunteering, local events, that sort of thing? Americans seem to see that as pretty important.
Very much so. Things like voting, community service, local advocacy, they're often framed as vital for democracy and strong communities.
Yeah.
The report I saw linked regular volunteering or attending religious services with rating your community more positively.
So a strong emphasis on individual citizens getting involved. How does that compare to Japan? They have those neighborhood associations, right, Shonaikai?
Yes, chonaikai or jichikai. Japan has this long tradition of quite formal neighborhood organizations. They handle things like local festivals, safety patrols, sharing information. It's a more structured collective approach.
Maybe participation is dropping a bit in cities, but the structure itself is more formal than the often voluntary ad hoc groups you might see in the U.S.
Right. And trust in Japan seems more specific, built through those established networks and personal relationships within the neighborhood. Research there suggests things like income inequality or age differences in a neighborhood can influence that trust.
Whereas the report suggested Americans might report higher general trust in people, but Japanese perhaps see more practical value in engaging through those specific personal ties.
Yeah, it's a subtle but important difference. So you have the more structured, geographically based Japanese system with social expectations versus the more voluntary, often interest-based, maybe more fluid American approach.
Fascinating. So in the U.S., community might be something you actively build or seek out more?
Perhaps. Even though geography matters, individualism might mean bonds are less fixed. The Japanese chonaikai is more tied to simply where you live.
And that American value on privacy comes in again. Knowing some neighbors is good, trusting them with a key, but maybe not knowing everyone too closely, fewer parties. It suggests boundaries are important.
The ideal of the single-family home with a yard might play into that too, reinforcing a sense of private space. Japanese neighborhood relations, historically, often involved more interdependence, especially in older settings.
And U.S. community action often feels very grassroots, volunteer-driven. Citizen initiative is a big theme. Japanese structures seem more integrated with local government historically.
Yeah, different emphasis on where the initiative comes from. It highlights different ideas about responsibility for the community.
Okay, let's pivot to the family unit, another area with huge shifts and differences.
Absolutely. The report really emphasized the diversity of American families today. The traditional nuclear family, while still present, is definitely not the only model anymore.
Right. You see way more single-person households now compared to decades ago. Single-parent families are much more common, too, mostly headed by mothers.
The numbers are quite stark. Married couples make up a smaller share of households. Single-person households have surged. And yeah, a lot of single parents, many of whom were never married. Fewer households have kids under 18 now, too.
And there's just more acceptance, it feels like, of different family forms, step families, adoptive families, families with same-sex parents.
Definitely more visible and accepted. Plus, people are marrying later. The median age for first marriage has gone up quite a bit since the mid-20th century, and more adults are just not marrying at all.
What about young adults, still living at home more?
It seems so, especially the 18-24 group. A majority live with parents. Less common for the 25-34 bracket, but still significant. Probably a mix of social changes and economic pressures.
Now, core American family values, independence seems key, right? Raising kids to eventually leave the nest and be self-sufficient.
That's a very strong cultural narrative, fostering independence from a young age, which connects back to that individualism theme.
And the reality of parenting is often juggling work and childcare, right? Highlighting the need for affordable care and support systems.
Exactly. And caring for elderly parents is another big issue. Often falls on family, unpaid, because professional care is so expensive. There are lots of calls for better policy to support caregivers and the elderly.
So healthy families are about trust, support, communication, the family as a vital support network, but facing real stressors. How does this compare to Japan? The report mentioned the historical IE system.
Right, the traditional IE system. That was focused on the multi-generational household. Patrilineal inheritance, keeping the family line going, was paramount, often taking precedence over individual wishes.
And the family registry, the koseki, reinforced that patriarchal structure. Clear roles. Father as head, mother managing the home and kids.
Exactly. And traditional Japanese parenting often emphasized things fitting that collectivist mold, discipline, conformity, respect, responsibility towards the group, harmony.
But Japan has also shifted more towards nuclear families now, like the U.S.
Yes, the nuclear family is the most common form now.
Sure.
But that legacy of collectivism, the emphasis on family obligations, it still holds considerable influence, even if the formal IZ system isn't dominant.
So the historical emphasis was on blood ties, defined roles, collective well-being. Quite different from the American focus on individual autonomy and the sheer variety of accepted family types.
Very different foundations. And that expectation for young adults to leave home is much stronger in the U.S. narrative, even if economics complicates it. The transition to adulthood in Japan was historically more tied into your role within the family.
And elder care. Traditionally a much stronger expectation for family, especially daughters-in-law, to provide that care in Japan.
Yes, traditionally that was the expectation. While American families provide care, there's maybe more public debate about society's role in providing support systems.
And the U.S. data shows wide acceptance of diverse families now. The Japanese koseki system was historically much more rigid about defining who counted as family.
Right, different levels of institutional flexibility there. Okay, let's get into the nuances of everyday interaction, communication, etiquette, personal space.
Ah, yes, this is where culture shock often hits hardest. American communication generally direct, right. Say what you mean, focus on clarity, maybe sometimes putting information over feelings, low context.
That's the general description. Often informal, pretty quickly, using first names, casual greetings like how are you, that don't always expect a deep answer. Emphasis on verbal clarity. Silence can feel awkward.
And that directness can be jarring for people from high-context cultures like Japan. I've read anecdotes about Japanese students finding American small talk or friendliness overwhelming at first.
Very common. Okay, etiquette. Handshakes for intros are standard, hugs more for friends, personal space maybe arm's length, about 2-3 feet.
Yeah, people can get uncomfortable if you get too close, might step back. Eye contact is generally respectful, but staring is rude. And dining table manners, how to order, and tipping is basically expected in restaurants.
Right. Now, Japan, communication is famously indirect, high context.
Yeah.
Lots relies on nonverbal cues, shared understanding, reading the air. Saving face kao tataru is critical. A direct no is often avoided.
And that Hanan Tatme idea, your real feelings versus your public face, all about maintaining harmony.
Precisely. Politeness and formality, keigo, are crucial, reflecting social hierarchy. Bowing is the traditional greeting, varying by situation. Much less physical contact, like handshakes or hugs in formal settings.
Less direct eye contact, too, especially with superiors. Fewer big gestures. And silence isn't awkward, it's part of the conversation.
Exactly. Silence can mean thoughtfulness, respect, and everyday stuff always taking shoes off indoors. Tipping is generally not done. Slurping noodles is fine, shows enjoyment.
So the burden of clarity is on the speaker in the U.S., but maybe more on the listener to interpret in Japan. Huge potential for misunderstandings.
Huge. And politeness means different things. Maybe clarity and efficiency in the U.S. versus consideration and avoiding conflict in Japan.
And personal space. Maybe the larger U.S. preference ties back to individualism, more physical space, historically. While Japan's density led to norms for coexisting closely, like avoiding eye contact on packed trains.
That makes sense. It's about adapting to the environment. Okay, let's pull back a bit to some overarching themes. Individualism in America, we keep coming back to it.
Yeah, independence, self-sufficiency, personal rights, being unique. Relying too much on others can almost be seen negatively sometimes.
And it affects everything. Decisions prioritize personal benefit. Self-expression means standing out. Social pressure to be independent. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
Even community involvement, maybe weaker group ties sometimes, but also fostering individual initiative to start things or volunteer. It really shapes the relationship between the individual and society, contrasting sharply with Japanese collectivism.
And then there's American consumer culture. The report talked about its rise post-WWII.
Right. Prosperity, mass production, advertising. Buying stuff became central to life. Identity even. Credit made it easier.
And it ties success, happiness, status to possessions. Your identity can get wrapped up in what you buy. Drives the economy, sure, but raises questions about environment, inequality, maybe superficiality. There's growing tension with sustainability now.
Definitely. Another big theme, multiculturalism in the U.S. Recognizing and valuing differences within one nation, moving beyond just assimilation.
Yeah, aiming for equal respect for different cultural groups, an inclusive national identity. It's influenced education, social norms, politics tied to identity politics, calls for recognizing past wrongs.
But it has challenges too, right? Potential fragmentation, debates about universal values versus cultural relativism, balancing diversity with shared values.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if we tie these together, that American work ethic, chasing the American dream, often framed individually and measured partly through consumption, individualism and consumerism feed each other.
Makes sense. And individualism champions individual rights, while multiculturalism asserts the rights of individuals within diverse groups. Sometimes creates tension when group practices seem to clash with individual rights or the common good.
It's complex. And American pop culture, full of individualism and consumerism, is everywhere globally, including Japan. But as the report noted, Japanese individuals visiting the U.S. often still experience significant culture shock. The exported image isn't the full reality.
Right. The lived experience can be very different from the movies or music. Underscores that cultures are complex, not monolithic.
Exactly. So, wrapping up here, we've journeyed through religion, work, community, family, social interaction, finding lots of contrasts between the U.S. and Japan.
And that individualism versus collectivism thread really did run through almost everything, didn't it?
It really did. And it's crucial to remember culture shock. That's the lived reality of these differences when people cross between them.
Understanding these nuances, though, it's just so important in our connected world for better communication, empathy, just working together effectively.
Couldn't agree more. And both societies are constantly changing, evolving. So this kind of intercultural understanding isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process of learning.
Absolutely. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. What are some of your own hidden cultural assumptions? And how could understanding perspectives like these maybe enrich how you see the world and your own place in it? Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.